Well, today our adventures have brought us to the West Virginia Penitentiary. It's a museum now, and it's pretty impressive looking from the outside. Our tour starts in just about 15 minutes, and we're going to go through a inside tour, so pretty excited about that. And there it is, look at that. Man, it's amazing. It's like an old castle. So we'll be going inside in just a few minutes. There it is. West Virginia Penitentiary. Alright, so here we are. It says the Dungeon of Horrors. So they do some like night tours and haunted tours and stuff. Archive of the Afterlife, Paranormal Museum. Alright, hello. Here we are.
Good afternoon. How are you folks doing today?
Great.
Awesome. Very nice. Very good. I'd like to welcome you all to the West Virginia State Penitentiary. My name is Jason Murrow, tour guide. If y'all have any questions today, please feel free to ask me. Please take all the photos, videos you like. Take photos of me. I don't mind. Just hope your nice cameras keep working. No one of you has been here before. Any of you folks been here before? Oh, welcome back. Welcome back. We're always happy to have our repeat offenders here. So, now, have any of y'all toured any other prisons such as Alcatraz, Mansfield, Eastern State Penitentiary, Missouri?
Mansfield.
OSR, okay, Mansfield. Anyone else? Brushy Mountain, Missouri State, Idaho State? All right, very nice. Well, this prison was established in 1866 and for 129 years served as West Virginia's main maximum security state prison. Now, it was from 1866 to March 27, 1995. And when it closed, this was home to 652 of the most violent inmates in West Virginia. About 200 of them had a life sentence, whether that would have been life with the chance of parole or life without the chance of parole. Now, upon closure, most of these inmates were transferred down to the newly constructed Mount Olive Correctional Complex in southern Fayette County, West Virginia, not too far out of Charleston. Ironically, several dozen of these guys never left Moundsville. There's another modern high-security facility over on 12th Street called Northern Correctional Center and Jail, and some of the guys are over there today. So in the midst of your all's tour today, if you happen to hear me mention Mount Olive or Northern, just keep that in mind where the surviving members of this prison are living now. The reason the prison had to be closed ultimately was due to a court order, the West Virginia Supreme Court, that said that even for a prison, this penitentiary was so unlivable, it violated the 8th Amendment. They said this was cruel and unusual punishment. They had no AC or heat to speak of in here ever. I can tell you all some of the cells in the summer, especially paired with body heat, were known to get upwards of 130 degrees. In retrospect, in the winter, officers and inmates could see their breath in the prison. It was frigid. I know one inmate in particular shared with me that the first thing he would do on winter mornings when he woke up, he'd wipe the frost off of him. So as you can imagine, pneumonia, hypothermia, frostbite would be issues over the years, but that was tip of the iceberg. They had a lot of inadequate plumbing from like the 20s and 30s. It was never updated. So you had a lot of sewage backup in the cells and in the kitchens. A lot of lighting problems, live wires exposed all over this place. Healthcare is essentially non-existent. And vermin infestation in this prison would have put Stephen King films to shame. They had roaches, rats, fleas, lice, maggots, bed bugs, silverfish, flies all throughout this place. Now the irony of that, especially nowadays, most folks tend to believe a dangerous, violent prison, a bad prison, would be Alcatraz. You know, it's like a household name. Everyone's heard of Alcatraz. That was a federal prison, only open for 36 years. They had 28 documented deaths of their inmates, whereas this prison had 998 documented deaths. And they started keeping track back in 1920. So you think about the 54 years before that, undocumented deaths. Now, I can tell you all today that in the late 70s into the 1980s, the Department of Justice compiled a top 10 list of the most violent correctional facilities in this country, whether it be state or federal facility. This is number 3 in the United States. Number 2 always evades me, but I do remember that number 1 on their list was Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary over in Kansas. So again, really this prison, certainly in more modern times, is known for no other reason as being one of the worst in the country. And naturally today, I'll share some more colorful details of those conditions and everything as we continue. Now this room here, this was the former non-contact visitation room, and we are on the inmate side. Originally, you used to be able to see through those grates. That's how they talked to their visitors, simply speaking through, until they realized after some while that some visitors were bringing dollar bills in here that they had rolled up real tight, real small. They'd be about that long or so, and they'd coat them with liquid LSD. Those dollars would be so small you could actually shove them through the holes and give them to inmates. So naturally something had to be done. So they sealed those grates off with panels. That's why you can't see through them now, but that is when they installed telephones above girls' heads, above the windows. So not only would it prevent stuff like that from happening from there on out, but it also give these guys a little more privacy with their friends and family. Now I'm sure y'all already got a glimpse of the chair, of course, from the other side. This is a real electric chair. We very affectionately call it Old Sparky. The death penalty was in effect in West Virginia until 1965, once capital punishment was abolished and still yet to be reinstated here. But they did have 94 total state-sanctioned executions on this property. In total, 85 hangings and 9 in the chair. Now what's really interesting with this chair especially was that it was built by an inmate here in the prison back in 1950. His name was Paul Glenn. He was a carpenter, and he built it out of solid oak wood. Now he actually modeled this chair after the chair that the state of Ohio used to use up at their original penitentiary, formerly in Columbus. Of course, you imagine an inmate building something like that didn't make him too popular in here, so he had to be transferred shortly thereafter. Now, if y'all have seen that prison movie, The Green Mile, you have a pretty good idea what something like that would look like. Pretty much very grim, very grotesque sight. But the chair and the original equipment to the chair, that would have all been located in the execution chamber in the old death house. The state tore the death house out back in 1967, but I'll show y'all later where that building stood and tell you a little more about it here a little later. You all are going to see many pieces of beautiful and awesome artwork today on your tour, and it was all done by the inmates, using mostly acrylic, some oil paints, but it gives you an idea of the staggering amount of wasted talent that they had in this prison. Kind of unfortunate, but do keep in mind as you view this artwork today, these inmates did not always have something to use such as a reference, like postcards or magazines. In other words, a lot of these paintings were done from the inmate's memory or otherwise their imagination. And your all's tour today will be around 90 minutes, give or take. Take us about that long to get y'all paroled. It'll be about a mile and a half walking tour. I will admit now it would be your opportune time to use the restroom if you need to. The next restroom that will be closest to will be over on the north yard. So right now really will probably be your best time. And I do want to kind of reiterate no AC or heat, so just know that what it feels like in this prison today when we go through this sliding grill in a moment is exactly what it felt on this day of the year while it was open, except of course this time of the year it's a little bit cooler because we're missing all that body heat, but just kind of something to keep in mind. But without further ado, if y'all are ready, we will officially go to prison. So where we are now, this is called a main corridor. We call it Main Street as a prison. Now the wall you see at the end of this hallway is a fake wall, been built to obscure view from some of our haunted house we have going on this time of year. Down that same direction is New Wall. That'll be our last stop here a little bit later. That was general population housing, also known as mainline housing. This is where about 400 to 500 inmates would have lived in 320 cells. Down below that fake wall, you find yourself in 2 more housing units and about 200 more cells. So down below there, the first housing unit would be P&R blocks. That was protective custody. That was for inmates who were convicted of crimes against women and children, and inmates deemed as informants, or what they would call rats or snitches. The inmates called P&R Rat Row. The housing unit at the southernmost end of this prison was C and D blocks. That was honor hall for the trustee inmates. Still inmates convicted of serious felonies, but they had 3 to 5 years of decent behavior in here to be considered a trustee, basically giving them a little more privilege. And the trustee inmates had really nice jobs here in the penitentiary as well. Now, the prison essentially is in 2 phases in terms of its construction. The north end is from that wall north. That's the original Civil War era side built by the convicts from 1866 to 1899. It was only built for 800 guys. Now, in the 20s and 30s, they had over 2,700 inmates. So the overcrowding was extreme, so they had to build extra prison. So from that same wall south, we call this South Hall, and this was built from 1929 to 59 to relieve that overcrowding. This side was built by construction crews because when the Great Depression began in October of 1929, Congress passed a law you could not hire an inmate for work. So I'll tell you a little more about the construction processes as we continue today, but we'll probably spend most of the time more or less over here on the north end of your all's tour. So we will get ready to actually swing into the Civil War era side of the prison at this time. But please do watch your step up here at the upper end. In the corner, there's a little rise in the floor. I will admit too, if any of y'all post any of that to YouTube and it goes viral and you win a bunch of money someday, just please remember my name is Jason. So we are now in the contact visiting room. Now they used to have long tables in here for the inmates and visitors. These guys were allowed one hug and kiss at the beginning of the visit with their visitor. For the remainder of that time, they could only hold the inmates' hands across the table. That was the extent of what was allowed in here. This was the bathrooms for the inmates and their visitors while they were in here. Of course, nowadays the main focal point in here is this beautiful inmate artwork. And this was done mostly by two inmates, Sean Adamy, who was in for burglary, and Smitty Harding, who was in for a murder. Sean Adamy was colorblind, so Smitty had to mix the paint for him and direct him where to put each of the colors. There's actually evidence of his condition with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, I'm no expert on it, but I know enough to tell you that if you look closely, you'll see the colors of their sashes are wrong, and they're holding the wrong weapons in their hands. I believe Raphael and Leonardo are switched around, something like that. Done an awesome job nevertheless, but Sean and Smitty painted the family-friendly artwork in here for the young kids. You know, this was a frightening experience for them. You think about it. When the kids came into the lobby, they were searched by a correctional officer just like everybody else. That was weird for them. Then they come in here, it was smelly and noisy. There would have been a CO up there with the 12 gauge watching them. So the inmates, and just probably I'd say about any prison, but especially here, they kind of had an unspoken code of ethics. The two main cardinal points of that is inmates did not believe in messing with women and children. So they, when they could, in their own ways, kind of look out for the kids. This is kind of a testament to that. The inmates really like the kids, so look out for them. Now the paper mache display in the corner, that was made back in 1987 by Dale Pratt. Now he was in here for murder. He actually made that for the Indian Museum right across the street. That is the ancient Adena people, the ones that built the burial mounds in this area. Now I imagine when y'all pulled up earlier, you noticed that mound right across the way. That is the Grave Creek Mound. It's the largest conical-shaped Native American burial mound in the country, about 70 feet tall or so. Kind of a funny story behind why the little boy by the stump is missing his face. One thing to understand about that is the penitentiary is still owned by the Division of Corrections of West Virginia, and so they host a lot of training here year-round with military, law enforcement, corrections officials, folks from around the world come to train here every year. Now, this is about 15 years ago now. They had 2 nights where members of the U.S. Marines were in here training with night vision goggles. Now, for whatever reason, one of those Marines jumped into the display and got startled when all of a sudden, through his goggles, he seen the boy right behind him. He caught him off guard, and when he spun around, butt of his rifle took the face right off the end. So, my understanding is the state has not invited the U.S. Marines back. But nevertheless, he showed the little boy his thoughts. Now you will notice over there on the wall, the little window next to the painting of Merlin the Wizard. That is the old medication window, also known as the pill window. See, for many years, this room looked totally different. This actually used to be the dining hall. It looked totally different. To better imagine this, you got a first picture of this wall and the wall of the cabin gone. This was a massive open room that extended north approximately 300 feet. Inmates would have came in and exited the same way we did a little bit ago. Of course, they just hang a left if they needed medicines, usually with blood pressure or psych meds in here, but nonetheless, where they would get those. Now you're probably wondering, well, why the remodel? Why the change? And this will be a little bit easier for you to imagine if y'all get a mental snapshot. Just get a mental image of what this area looks like in today's time. That way, when we get out here to the hallway in a moment, I'll explain to you what brought about this change. It'll make perfect sense for you here shortly. So, right over here in front of the painting of the chimney, there's a little pipe on the floor, so just be mindful of that so you don't trip over here. Now back when this is still a dining hall, and again, that was before this long wall was ever here, this part of the floor where I'm standing on back to the far wall and over towards the west wall by Jefferson Avenue, this was the dining hall. So decent sized tall hall, they could seat about 350, 400 guys at a time if they wanted. The tile portion of the floor stretched all the way west. This was serving area where they would approach, get the trays off the warming ovens. And at the end of the tile floor, on back and to the left more or less, was the kitchen. Now typically it would take the inmate kitchen crew anywhere from 2, some days 3 hours first to clean up roaches and rats in here. I mean, it was so bad before they turned the lights on in the kitchen around 3 in the morning or so, they described the kitchen floors as looking like this. Like it was shifting or pulsating. That's how thick the layer of vermin was on the floor. It gave that illusion. Now, they had an open sewer close to the kitchen due to the ancient plumbing. A lot of days it would back up into the floor. Then you had raw sewage and vermin about that close to food being prepared for population and staff. No hairnets or gloves were given out back there either. The ceiling in here was infested specifically with mice and rats, and sometimes they would die up there, attracting flies. A lot of stories of maggots dropping down, rolling up inmate shoulders into the green beans. Now, can't even imagine all that on top of a lack of AC and heat year-round. But it comes as no surprise that they had a number of riots in here over the years because of the horrible conditions, even for a prison. But right where we're standing in the old dining hall, this is where the last and the most violent riot kicked off, where it began. That was the New Year's Day riot of 1986. It lasted 52 hours. 16 hostages would be taken, 15 COs, and a worker out of the kitchen. Thankfully, they didn't kill any of them. 3 of them were abused very, very badly. But they brutally murdered 3 of their own inmates that were labeled as informants, rats, or snitches. The problem was, though, these inmates had been promised change for years with little to no action. So they came up with a list of 15 demands of things they would like to see done, changed, otherwise improved. They were able to present those demands to Governor Archmore in our museum area. That used to be the law library where they held negotiations. They only agreed and settled on one of the 15 demands. That was the construction of a new dining hall that would replace this one. One that the inmates wanted to have AC and heat, and one that would be much, much cleaner and more sanitary. Thankfully, when Governor Moore said, "I'll give you a new dining hall," it brought the riot to an end. But it would cost West Virginia a little over $3 million to build that dining hall, and it wouldn't open until March of 1987, almost 8 years exactly to the day before the place was shut down. When the new dining hall opened, they remodeled this old one by building this long wall. That's when they put the rooms in behind this wall, such as the visiting room we just walked out of, the maintenance area in the middle we passed by, and up behind me here's the steak shop. That's where they had all the clothes and beds stored for the inmates, where they would also delouse inmates on day one if it was determined they had lights. So a lot of areas of the prison have seen remodeling, renovations over the years, this being a good example of it, so it takes just a little imagination in some areas more so than others, but kind of pieces it together for you. Now, just a little side note, which I will mention, 90% of your all's tour will be, I'll tell you about the inmate life, officer life, prison history, but I will touch very briefly on some of our paranormal history, because I noticed y'all been watching or listening to Jasper up there. And we actually, in modern times, we don't call this the main dining room hallway. We call this Shadow Main hallway. Because back in May of 2002, a good friend of mine, her name is Polly Gear, she was staying the night here when around midnight, she's by herself in this hallway about halfway down, heading towards the lobby. She heard a metallic sound behind her, kind of similar to what Jasper's making, but she turned around, and right in front of the new cafeteria door, she spotted a solid black shadow standing there facing her direction. She said the light from her flashlight seemed to pass through it, as if it was transparent. What was stranger was whatever that thing was appeared to acknowledge the light, because it, like, what's this way doing to me? Now, as if that wouldn't be freaky enough, she continues walking backwards down that hallway. She raised her Sony Mavica. She took one photo, even though it was a little sideways. She captured that shadow that we call Shadow Man, hence Shadow Man hallway. Now, a little before Polly's visit, around 2000, MTV was here filming the pilot episode for their show called Fear. And it's been off air for years now. You can find our episode of Fear on YouTube. But that's really what kind of helped get us recognized nationally as being haunted or supernaturally active, whatever you like to call it. And ever since then, you all name a paranormal show, and I promise you we've had them at least once. Like I say, starting with MTV Fear, most haunted from England, scariest places on earth, most terrifying places in America, Dead Files, Dresden Files, My Ghost Story, Ghost Stories, Ghost Island, Ghost Life, Paranormal State, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Feature, Paranormal Channel, Destination Fear, Mysteries, and Bandits, Stranded. I'll have y'all repeat this for me here a little bit later. But we do offer different events and tours for just about anyone daring enough, brave enough to come in and see for themselves. 13-year-olds and up can come in from 6 to 9, 15-year-olds and up can come in from 9 to midnight. But for the rest of us adults who have a little more nerve, we bring you in here at 10 p.m. and we keep you in here till 4 a.m. with all the lights out, of course. Well, hey, the best advice I can give you folks, if you're ever here some night around 2 or 3 in the morning and someone like Jasper doesn't want to keep following you around and whispering his name or your name in your ear, hey, you got a lot of area to roam, just keep running till 4, we'll let you out. Here in the cafeteria and the kitchen, just my opinion, this is sometimes one of the more active areas in the prison. Yeah, I've been in here a lot now. I've been back in the kitchen. with others and by myself, and you'll hear movement out here, sound like people shuffling, walking. We get a lot of shadow activity over along that corner. We've both visibly seen it. A lot of our visitors have captured it on photo and they send it to us. And it's always that corner. I don't know what's so significant about it, but the shadow's either moving from the windows to the kitchen door or vice versa. So, kind of weird. But this was that new dining hall. This was built, again, as a result of the 1986 riot, and the inmates really appreciated this. As strange as it sounds, they felt they put the effort in to acquire this through the riot, and of course he had AC and heat in here. Now, whether you ask an inmate or an officer, they're bound to tell you the food in here was really where it was at. Because for prison food, honestly, it was delicious. It was like a full-service restaurant, because you name it, they would have had it at least one day of the month. Pork chops, hamburgers, hot dogs, french fries, onion rings, chicken wings. One day of the month, they fed every inmate a steak dinner. Every Thanksgiving, the state would order 200 turkeys to feed this whole penitentiary. So it wasn't half bad for a place like this. Now, they put the trustee inmates in charge of the kitchen. They had about 20, 25 of them back there. They took care of everything. Cleaning, prepping, cooking, serving. They paid them about 70 cents a day to work the kitchen. But you know, honestly, a lot of folks kind of cringe at the idea of eating food made by prisoners. They didn't have a whole lot to worry about, though, because they were paid, and plus they seen it as a privilege. So they kind of policed themselves back there. There's a funny example of one day an inmate was cooking some soup. He used to have these massive kettles, and a mouse ran by this inmate. For whatever reason, he picked that mouse up, threw it in a pot of soup while it was cooking. The other inmates that watched him do that, they got so mad at him, they started throwing pots and pans at him trying to hit him, because it was like an understood, unspoken thing back there, you know, like, don't mess us up for us. Because if one guy jeopardized this spot, it put them all under more scrutiny, maybe compromise one of the others as well. So, and a testament to that, how delicious, clean, and safe the food really was every day officers and staff would pay $1.05 to eat the same meals. Now, them being from the local area, they knew that was a bargain. They couldn't get a better meal in Moundsville less than $1.05. But the officers and staff, they ate their meals behind the wall in the corner. That way they wouldn't have any problems with staring between officers and inmates. You imagine the wall not there, about 20 officers and approximately 150 inmates where we are. There'd be a lot of staring and glaring between the two groups. That would only add to the tension, maybe start a fight or something. So that's why they were always obscured from view back there. You can still see where the stainless steel tables used to be mounted. They had seating in here to feed 150 every half hour, about half a cell block at a time. Now, they did eat with silverware, believe it or not, a fork and spoon, and they'd get that at the salad bar when they came in. Then they would split off onto either one of the chow lines. The one on the left was the regular run-of-the-mill chow line. The one on the right was diet line. That was for diabetic inmates, Hindu inmates, Muslim inmates, inmates with special dietary needs or preferences. Now, they could go through the chow lines one time, get whatever they wanted, but they could help themselves all they wanted to the bar here. They would keep this stocked with fresh salad, soup, fruit, you name it. Not just the quality of the food was nice, but the quantity wasn't half bad either. When they were finished eating, they would take their trays to the far windows at either side. That's where the dishwashers were. And they would hold onto their silverware. They would take that to the door with them. Right underneath the writing by the door, well, it says silverware collection, but underneath that there would have been a table and two pans, and an officer would stand over there watching that closely, making sure inmates put the fork in the fork pan, spoon in the spoon pan. They count every piece before they open that door again. So if you've seen in the museum, though, already, we have one of those fork shanks. It's a really good example of how some of these guys were still slick enough to walk out of here with them despite the best efforts of the officer. That one in the museum is really a nasty example because they'd pull the middle prongs back on that fork, do damage in either direction. It's a pretty nasty weapon. The paintings in here, these were done with oil paints in the early 90s from 1991 to 1993. These were painted by the same inmates who I told you about earlier, Sean Adamy and Smitty Harding. Smitty Harding was an over-the-road trucker, and he was gone Monday to Friday of each week. Now, he got home late one Friday night. He said that his wife, Sandy, in his words, nagged him. He murdered his wife. And it wasn't until over a week later, sheriff's deputies discovered her in the freezer. Now, because of the aggravated, heinous nature of that, the judge sentenced Smitty to life without mercy, no chance of parole. When this prison closed, he was transferred to the Mount Olive Correctional Complex, where he stayed until about 3 years ago when he passed away. Now, Smitty painted a semi on that wall. See, you can speculate. Anytime they would ask Smitty why he did what he did to his wife Sandy, it's not like he would have a good excuse naturally, but he'd always say the same answer. He'd say, "I love Sandy, but she should not have nagged me." So kind of unsettling, obviously. Medieval pulled out. A little bit of some modern cameras, microphones dropping down in here. You're going to see some more modern surveillance equipment in the penitentiary as we continue today, but it's act like it's not here. That's been installed about 13 years ago or so by the state. They use those cameras to monitor the training events we have here. So they had no cameras in this prison when it was open. Another little interesting thing just to kind of take note of is that gun room in the middle. The officer in there, he or she would have had a 12-gauge shotgun. And you see how small those portholes are. Now you imagine sticking something like a 12-gauge shotgun through a porthole that big. I mean, that's all you could do with it. Just a little limited range of movement of the firearm creates even more blind spots than to begin with the columns. So then a few feet off either wall was uncovered. Directly in front of the room. Obviously the staff wall behind there was uncovered. So some of us, we kind of sarcastically call that the ineffective examination. But we're not. Now so far, we don't have any questions. If I ever go too fast for you, just please tell me to slow it down, repeat myself. The history here is incredible. A lot of cool stories, a lot of crazy stories. Sometimes I have a tendency to go a little quick, but like I say, the hardest part about my job is trying to achieve a balance of basically knowing what to convey, how to convey it. And I will be honest, the best I can do with some of this will be probably PG-13, but if you want to know the rated R stuff, catch up with me after a tour. So I'll tell you about some of that if you want to know it. And again, if you see something you're curious about that I don't mention, just please feel free to ask me. We're going to get ready to head out to North Yard, and just FYI, anytime we're outside today, if y'all like to take your masks off, you're more than welcome to. Get these crazy things off. Trust me, with me, the way I run my flapper, I'm always ready to get it off. So again, it's your personal preference when we're outside. You're more than welcome to. So here we are on North Yard. On the north flagging gate over the distance, that was the original construction, and that's where they housed the first 100 inmates or so. And those first 100 inmates, they were the construction crew for this north end of the prison. Like I say, it took them 33 years to build this from 1866 to 1899. That was non-stop for 33 years. What it was, they worked in shifts in rotation night and day, cutting and laying every block of sandstone by hand. Painstaking effort for them, especially in those times, to, ironically, build a place which would incarcerate them. But this gave them a sense of purpose, and they put pride into this work. And this will speak louder in words later. When we get over to the South Yard after a while, I'll remind you about it when we're over there, that was the side built by crews in modern times. It doesn't hold a candle to the quality or the character of this north end. Now, any of y'all seen that movie with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, Blues Brothers? Yes. So there's a prison at the beginning of that movie. That's Joliet Correctional up in Illinois. This is actually the sister prison of Joliet. Joliet is a larger property and compound, but they're both designed with Gothic Revival architecture, resembling a castle with the embattlements, turrets. That was all intended by design to be very ominous and uninviting to the inmates, but yet they wanted this to appear as a fortress to make the public feel very safe and secure. And unfortunately, the emphasis there should be feel safe and secure. Because I can tell you all that in the history here, they had an estimated over 500 escapes or attempts. Kind of embarrassing to admit, but on the bright side, there's only 2 that were never found. But when you really think about it though, these inmates had nothing but time to come up with a plan for literally anything, and many times did. They had numerous tunnel escapes out of here. Numerous times these guys would jump in a truck and try and crash through a gate. They had a guy escape in the back of a cement truck one time. And back in 1994, they had an attempted escape of 2 inmates that tried to climb over the perimeter walls with ropes they braided from dental floss. So it's a lot of floss. It's 25 feet high over there. So I don't know if Colgate needs to know that or not. Tallest part of the prison there, that was the administration building. The 3rd and 4th floor, that was the home of the warden and his family until the mid-50s. State law required them to live on site, raise the kids and everybody here. On the weekends, they'd have sleepovers. 2nd floor was mostly administrative offices for the warden, deputy warden, and a magistrate, folks like that. 1st floor, we'll actually be passing through a little bit later, so I'm going to hold off on that and tell you more when we're actually up close and personal with it. In the basement of the administration building used to be solitary confinement until about 1960. There were no cells down there. that was literally like a dungeon. They used to shackle them to the walls. Now, about 1960, they converted the hole, as it's known, into a boiler room and an overall maintenance area. They had a trustee inmate that lived down there. His name was R.D. Wall, Robert Daniel Wall. And he would cut the grass, take care of the boilers, maintain the tool room, things like that. Not just was R.D. a trustee, but amongst the population, he had a reputation as being the warden's favorite snitch. Now, on October 8, 1979, it was around midnight, 2 to 3 inmates went down there and they brutally murdered R.D., pretty much decapitated him. We only go down into the hole typically on our evening, our night tours, like our ghost tours. This time of the year on the weekends, in conjunction with our haunted house, we do offer 45-minute flashlight ghost walks of the north end here. They're called North Walk tours. So if you come back later tonight, we'll take you down there to the hole. Now, aside from the 1987 dining hall, you'll notice another modern addition is the Metal Blue Building. And that was built around 1972. That was West Virginia Prison Industries. They had a couple hundred inmates working in there Monday to Friday in workshops like welding, electrical, woodworking, photography, automotive. They converted books to Braille, binded books, and they made license plates and highway signs for the state in that building. Funny little story was back in 1982, they had to dock the inmates' wages over there for a couple weeks until the guys stopped peeing in the paint. Because every single license plate, when it came off the press, it was more yellow than any other color. It had like a yellow tint or a hue to it. And when the officers would ask the inmates about it, they'd say, what's this about? All they could get out of the inmates was the inmates would say, well, you're buying us faulty paint. Oh, well, that's because you're giving us this defective paint. Defective paint. Well, sure enough, come to find out, the inmates were taking the paint and urinating in it. So we call them pee plates that folks were driving with. And we've got one in the museum. You'll have to check it out later. So like I say, leave it to the convicts to come up with something nutty like that. The reason they were doing it was they knew the ammonia in their urine over time on those plates, combined with the sunlight, would cause that paint to peel. So over a period of years, they would have to end up making more license plates, making more money. So like I say, 1982, if you happen to see one of those on eBay and it has that yellow tint to it, makes a good conversation piece. Nowadays, we use the Blue Building as our event center. If y'all are ever looking for a venue to host any kind of gathering, it could be a family reunion, a birthday party, or even a wedding, just give us a call. Set you up here in prison. And honestly, we've had a lot of couples get married here. A lot of them. But really, when you think about it, what better place to receive your life sentence? It is a happy life sentence. That's a great difference, but there's always time for the ball and chain later. In all seriousness, though, I do tell folks it's the only prison you can have this much fun in. You name it, we've just about had it over there. We've had MMA fights, blood drives, auctions, steak fries, fish fries, gun shows, Princess Tea events for the little ones, superhero dance days for the little ones. We're friends with a guy from Georgia. His name is Gray Sarton, and he is a Johnny Cash impersonator. And once or twice a year, he'll come up here and give us like a Folsom Prison concert. So, pretty cool, you know. We're going to progressively work our way a little closer towards the north wagon gate. So these fences right here, we call bullpens. You got yard 2 on the south end, right up on the north is yard 1. You take the fences out and instead picture a 2-story white building in the same spot. That would have been the death house in the same spot. Built here in 1899, execution chamber would have been on the first floor along with 4 semicircle death cells. Not death row, but just as they call death cells, basically where they stayed the last couple nights of their stay. Second floor of the death house, they had a room for the chaplain, a room for officers, and a separate medical wing for inmates dying of smallpox, TB, influenza, and diphtheria. Back in the 20s, they had an outbreak of tuberculosis, and paired with the overcrowding at that time, TB spread like wildfire and was the #1 cause of death for the inmates in those years. But inside the death house is where they had those state-sanctioned executions, all 94 of them. Now, one strange thing, really strange thing to know about that is for many years, the state of West Virginia sold tickets, about 40 tickets, to the general public, to families, to come in and watch these guys being executed. It was like a morbid sense of family excitement. They would charge you $2 a person or $12 for a wagon load of your family to come through here and watch. They would advertise the hangings in the paper, and this is exactly how they would say it. They would say, pack a picnic, bring your family down to the state penitentiary, enjoy a nice hanging. And they would do that, and they would get the noose around an inmate's neck, and all of a sudden a crowd of spectators would go quiet, but from the back of the group you'd hear a father look at his young son, and he'd say, now boy, I want you to watch this real close, because if you don't straighten up, this is what's going to happen to you someday. Now that stuff used to happen. Now you talk about how much times have changed, right? I mean, totally different world. So what brought all that family excitement to an end was around 1937. They executed a man named Frank Heyer. Frank Heyer was the broadest inmate they ever hanged here. Very tall, broad-shouldered man. He had murdered his wife. He's from Pocahontas County. Well, it turns out Frank's rope was a little bit too long. It allowed him to gain too much momentum. By the time he caught and that rope tightened, Frank decapitated instantly. And his head actually landed in front of the feet of some kids up front. Traumatizing. And after that, lesson learned the hard way, the warden said, whoa, 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 from here on out, invitation only. So you had to have an invitation to come in. Usually that was only the inmate and victim's family and the media from there on out. So upon the abolition of the death penalty in West Virginia in 1965, inmates began to see the death house as an eyesore. You know, it was a grim reminder of the past. They asked the warden to remove it. In 1967, he sympathized and had it torn out. Now the bullpens we have here in place of them, this was built around 1970 or so, and they were the recreation yards for North Hall. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that here shortly, but there's a couple spots closer towards the North Wagon Gate I'd like for y'all to get a chance to take a look at first. Now right behind the Industries building is a smaller blue building that when the prison closed, it was known as the OMC, the Old Man's Colony, and that would have been for inmates 65 and older, typically with health problems. It just gave them a safe area to be housed away from younger population. No cells in there. That was just an open air dormitory, basically. Now, if you take that building out and in the same spot picture a two-story brick building over there, that would have been the female ward. Because until 1947, this penitentiary was co-ed. The ladies were always kept totally separate. Now, at most, they had around 100 ladies locked up here, but for that matter, over the years, they had children locked up in this prison as young as 12. Now, was one of those ladies who, in my opinion, was the most infamous inmate to ever be incarcerated here in Moundsville. And her name was Kathleen Maddox. Now, by chance, do any of y'all recognize the name Kathleen Maddox? Kathleen Maddox was Charlie Manson's mother. Her and her brother, his uncle, Charlie Maddox, Luther Maddox, they were both locked up here for armed robbery. And what it was back in the 30s, they were in Charleston. They robbed a gas station with a broken ketchup bottle. Got him 3.5 years here in the state pen. Now at this time, Charlie's about 7 years old. Well, he was growing up and living with his Aunt Glenna up in McMecken. That's just about 4.5 miles north of here. Charlie was here a lot as a kid visiting his mother. He had memories of this prison. That's why if you've ever seen any Charlie's prison interviews, sometimes they'd say, Charlie, what about your mother? And Charlie would almost always say, oh, my mother's the penitentiary. Well, that was his thought association. He associated memories of his mom with memories of this Gothic prison. After everything happened with him, he's out in California prison system. March of 1983, he wrote a letter to the warden here requesting to be transferred from Vacaville Correctional Facility here to the West Virginia State Penitentiary to put him closer to his family. We have this letter in a museum. You'll have to check it out later if you've yet to see it. But just paraphrasing, he basically told Bordenkercher, he said, I can't get no mercy in California. Please answer back, Charlie Manson. Now, Bordenkercher, in true form, responded, and he said, Dear Mr. Manson, when hell freezes over, and he signed it, Donald Bordenkercher, his official response. So, no mercy, I guess, for Charlie in West Virginia either. He still has some family in the area. But like I say, you have to remember, check that letter out later. Since he didn't really have a good upbringing with education, his grammar and penmanship have been reduced to chicken scratch, but still nonetheless kind of a neat item to see. So, what happened at the female building was in 1968, they had another riot. The inmates set fire to it. They just decided to tear it down. So the OMC right there was built around 1970-72, along with the construction of the Industries building. So here we are in Yard 1, and like I say, these bullpens were recreation yards, rec yards for North Hall. North Hall was administrative segregation. Basically, North Hall was the jail within this prison. It was for the worst of the worst, the most violent in the state. North Hall was into the line. The inmates called North Hall the Alamo because they said it was their last stand. They were locked down 22.5 hours a day. They were only out here for 1 hour of rec time daily. When they went back in the housing unit, they were given a 15-minute shower and provided 15 minutes to make only a legal call to their attorney or to their lawyer if they had a reason to. Now, all this razor wire around us is testament alone to how dangerous and truly unpredictable these inmates were. Despite how shiny it is all original from back in 1987. That is stainless steel military grade concertina. That's the real McCoy. That's nasty stuff, very much like what they use in combat. It's designed to bleed you out. Every inch of that wire is razor, not just the hooks on it. Those meat hooks are designed to embed into muscle fibers. So if you were to get caught in that real bad, anytime you panic or tense up, your muscle's actually going to do the damage and pull that wire in deeper. To give you an idea how truly sharp it is, that was manufactured by the Gillette Razor Company. So as they would say, it is the best a man can get. Pretty nasty stuff. Now they did, of course, have one or two guys that thought they could make it through the wire, despite not having very far they could run. But they did have a couple that tried. One of the guys left something behind. And you'll notice actually that is a little section of a zipper, presumably off of an inmate's jacket. And you know, maybe he thought, well, I'll bundle up, add some layers, be like almost like padding or armor for him, whatever. And well, just kind of ripped the zipper out, and as you can tell, it's been here ever since. Now the other guy that tried to get through that wire wasn't as fortunate. He got so entangled, what they would do is they would cut a 1 to 2 foot section of wire on either side of that inmate's body, take him off, put him on a gurney with the wire still intact, roll him up to medical and surgically remove it. Now the problem with that is that's high tensile wire. It's under a lot of pressure. So when you go to cut it, it slings back real fast under pressure. So you know that when they're going to rescue those guys that were that tangled, it's digging in deeper. So probably learned their lesson. But again, it's kind of food for thought for you. What was their plan? Where are they going? So kind of crazy stuff. The cells in North Hall are 5 by 7 by 7. Today they look just about the same way they did when the place closed. All the original artwork and cell writing is intact. Now when we enter North Hall, you are going to see the first 4 cells are separate from all the others. They had to be kept separate from all the other segregated troublemakers because when they got around them, someone ended up getting attacked, stabbed, or worse. The first cell on your right was home to William Red Snyder's cell. William Red Snyder. He was from Weston, West Virginia. He murdered his father and the father of his sister's boyfriend. Now when he got here, he was charged with 3 inmate murders, and he became the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood gang, the AB. Red was very feared, very respected amongst population, and the AB pretty much was the most powerful gang here during the last 9 years it was open. 2 cells down from Red was his best friend, Rusty Lassiter, who was in for grand larceny. For about 5 years, they allowed both of them out here to enjoy their 1 hour together without any trouble. But early morning of November 16, 1992, Red got high off of some pills that Rusty had gave him. So by time for them to come out here, Red was very intoxicated, and Rusty was aware of it. Before he had a chance to exit a cell, when they popped their doors, Rusty went into Red's cell and stabbed him 37 times from his chest all the way up through his face, killing him. He actually asphyxiated beneath his bunk. He drowned on his blood. Speaking of the paranormal, those of us who work here nowadays, we know and feel that Red is one of those guys that hasn't, I guess we could say, just fully moved on. All we know is sometimes we've heard him talking in his cell and around it. Weird, you know, but in his cell, around his cell, we've had visitors during daytime and nighttime visits that have recorded what sounds to be Red talking on their recorders. It's called an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. Thing was you hear Red's voice, you never forget it. He was a smoker his whole life. He'd be out here with a bugler can full of coffee, golf ball size chew in his mouth, smoking at the same time. It's very strongly held belief amongst the inmates that if you died here, much less if you were killed here, your soul was to stay in this prison to endlessly wander the cell blocks and the corridors for eternity, never to be free. They literally lived and died believing that. It was so strongly held that when the state knew an inmate was gravely ill, about to pass away, they would take him out of prison. They'd send him down to the hospital a couple miles down the road so they could pass away at the hospital, just out of courtesy. So, you know, a life sentence is bad enough, but much less eternity, you know. So, but when we go in here, again, Red cell will be the first on your right. I will admit, typically we don't mind for folks to enter the prison cells, get selfies on the commode, or whatever floats your boat. Unfortunately, so far this year, we haven't really been doing that as much as we used to, and it's not our doing, it's just Marshall County. They would prefer people to not fully enter the prison cells. Now, here's the thing. I do want y'all to be able to peek in and look, so please do. I mean, we'll just, don't go more than a foot in, we'll be all right. Just, you stand at the door, peek in, and please do get pictures of these cells. But, you know, if you go in there, I guess I'll just have to keep you locked in there. So. But do watch your head when we go in here. There is low clearance with the ceiling, and do watch your step. Yeah, these locks, this is all pretty much original from around 1921 or so. And just like 10 through 12, I don't think they're locked, but for some reason they're just seized up. And as long as I've been coming here and working here, they've always been closed, so
When I was going through the Mansfield prison, they said, don't go in and shut the door because we don't have any keys to get you out.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is it? It costs like $1,500 for the locksmith or something?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Didn't enough to get you out.
We've had folks, I personally have had at least 3 times where on tour I've had someone like really actually officially get locked in.
Lock themselves in?
Yeah. And fortunately, of course in here it's almost physically impossible to lock yourself in, but that always happens down in Newhall where the electronic cells are. Fortunately for them, we have a manual override I can use, but I always like to make them sweat it a little bit. So, I don't know what I'm going to do. It was a shank, best of my knowledge, about that long or so, about like that. In fact, in Rusty's cell, you can still see the part of the bunk where we think he removed the steel to make the shank.
So like that?
Very similar. Just, it's kind of long and real slender, real small, probably about like that. And to my understanding, it wasn't very sharp. It was a little bit dull. So, yeah, that was a really nasty attack. My understanding, the last time he stabbed him, it was right here. So, you know, it was kind of scary stuff. But you see how small these cells are, 5 by 7 by 7, 35 square feet. Now you remember how I told you earlier in the 20s and 30s, they were overcrowded with over 2,700 inmates. In those days, these exact same cells you're looking at had 3 men in each one.
Oh my.
They had 2 bunks and a thin little mattress on the floor for the 3rd inmate. 3 grown men. It's unimaginable. If you look about yay high along the walls, you're going to see this, the holes in the walls. This is where the rivets used to be that held the 2nd bunks in years ago. You can't even imagine. If a guy's up all night throwing up by morning, the entire cell will be set. Or, you know, if a guy's on the 2nd bunk around midnight wants to use the bathroom, got to be careful not to land on the guy on the floor, or else, you know, have problems with that. When they're on the commode, the guy on the floor, his face is right between their legs. So, wasn't designed to be comfortable, but I mean, you can imagine, you can see for yourself, that would have to be as uncomfortable as it could possibly get. You know, and let's be realistic about it. These were convicts, so they're out on the weight towel, they're pumping iron. These are big built, rippled, strapping, yoked up inmates, 3 of them per cell. Well, there's only 3 guys my size. Wasn't until modern times they turned this into segregation, what they call ADSEG. 1 man per cell, 22.5 hours a day, and they're locked in here. And their 3 meals a day were fed to them in their cells through the holes at the bottom of the door is what they call a bean hole. It's all served on plasticware. The trays would go through the right of the bean hole, the cups in on the left. The problem was at least once or twice or a day in here during feeding, when they'd come up to feed the inmate, they'd hand him the plastic tray, and the inmate would throw the tray back out at the officer, or take a cup of spit, urine, vomit, feces, and blood and throw it into the officer's face. That was called gassing. And it happened so frequently because they had an endless supply of their bodily fluids. And it shows you how careless, because see, it wasn't just disgusting to get feces in your face. It was very nerve-wracking and scary when you consider some of these inmates had AIDS, HIV, hepatitis, syphilis, and the inmates knew it. That's how careless they were. They didn't care if you took HIV home to your family that night. I can tell you all that the officers that worked in here in 1987 were paid around $8 an hour. Now, I know that was relative to the 80s, but I mean, you just kind of let that set in. It takes a very special breed of person to be able to do this line of work. Thank God there's people that can do it. I can handle the dead ones okay, but the living ones. So anyway, these guys had buddies that had the jobs over in industries. And what they'd do is they'd have them wrap tape around 3 or 4 razor blades and real nonchalantly swing them into bullpens. These guys would bring razors in under their tongue when the CO's not watching. Or they bring hacksaw blades in their shoes or boots. You think of the time on our hands, they would spend hours, night, days, and weeks with those blades scoring the steel, be it on the doors, the bunks. They would score it, score it, and score it. Eventually that'd be thin enough you could break it off by hand. They'd take that strip of steel, sharpen it on the floor, turning it into a shank or a shiv. One way they would make their weapons. And there's numerous examples in here. For instance, like here on 8, if you see the scoring, then finally you break that off, you can sharpen it on the floor just like he did in 8. Scrappy here on number 9, he had presumably him. He had made a weapon. You see from, you know.
That's where that piece came out.
So,
They have that hanging up in the museum, don't they?
many ones like this.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
You can see where the riches of the wills are, they use for like, the ridge of edge, you know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, these guys couldn't always get their hands on a blade, so they would resort to using dental floss. It just took them substantially longer. They would coat dental floss with tooth powder or scouring powder. That was their abrasive. And the trick was they would sit in their cells working the floss loose on the steel. Think about it. If you worked it tight, the friction's going to keep burning through. You need 800 miles of floss. They just, what else are they going to do? They sit in here, keep it loose, and they can just freeform, shank right out of the steel with dental floss.
Wow.
When that was discovered, they couldn't even allow these guys dental floss. But for that matter, they could turn their toilet paper into deadly weapons. They'd take their toilet paper, roll it up into the shape of a shank, wet it with toothpaste or soapy water and let it dry. A little bit later, they'd wet it again and work it and let it dry. They keep repeating that process, basically paper mache. But they would get it so hard that they could actually break your skin and stab you with toilet paper, and it'd kill you just as dead as a steel shank would. So it kind of shows you what the officers were up against. This was back in the time when they allowed inmates tobacco. You know, they could smoke in here. They had little matchbooks. You know, they light fires, clothing, bedding, TVs, anything. They'd set on fire in here. There were so many fires in North Hall. In the ash. Very, very chaotic environment in here. Very stressful environment for the officers. I know of a couple officers that said this was the only area in the prison that when they worked here, this was the place of the prison that gave them ulcers. It wasn't, I was so stressful, it wasn't just mentally taxing, it took a toll on their physical health. The sewage and plumbing in here was terrible. If an inmate flushed his commode, it would back up in the sinking commode to the next cell down, and then the next, and then the next, and so on. So what some of these guys would do, especially if they didn't like their neighbor, they'd flush their commode once a day. It was late at night when he could hear his neighbor brushing his teeth.
Oh.
And you think how disgusting that would be. And how in July and August, how ripe it would smell. I mean, let alone the BO of 160 inmates, just the sewage alone. How easy inmates and officers could get sick in here. I mean, think how unsanitary this would have been. The roaches in here, 3 to 4 inches long. You could just about throw a saddle on them. And have you ever seen a flying cockroach? These were cockroaches that had wings and they'd land on you. Rats in North Hall were the size of cats. Sometimes I've heard them described as small possums. These were meat-eating rats. And they would actually work their ways into the plumbing of the cells. I've heard a lot of stories of inmates waking up in the morning to a rat on their toilet staring at them. Some of these guys would keep the rats as pets, and they'd use their shoelaces as leashes. Crazy stuff, you know. The doors in here have a 2-stage lock, which was state-of-the-art in the 20s when it was installed. Halfway down, you have a key lock. Takes a crutch key. Second stage of the lock is a large steel bar that extends the entire length from cell 1 to the very end. Each tier has one. That's called the slam bar. You know the phrase, the slammer, going to the slammer? That's where you get that from? Now, they used this all the way up to March of '95. In fact, some of the COs preferred this. Even though it was outdated and more time-consuming, it's foolproof compared to the electronic cells that can malfunction and break down. As long as you grease this up once in a while, it would never fail you. It's very secure. And matter of fact, it still works today.
Does it slide across the whole door?
Pretty well, more or less. Like you can see how each door has this little lip on it.
Yeah.
So this little like shoulder,
Right.
it just boom, it slides
locks
over,
in there.
and it kind of locks in,
Okay.
and it just holds it right into place. And so, for instance, if you wanted to let only 10 out, you first, you know, unlock the crutch. Then you go down to where cell 1 would be in that cage, and you'd operate the slam handle.
Right.
And then 10 would be the only door fully unlocked, and every other door
Ah, I got you.
still key locked. So yeah, sure enough, it's
2-stage, yeah.
yes, sir. Yeah, two-stage lock, and pretty wild. But then again, you know, good old 1920s technology.
That's probably tracked it out in the dark anyway.
The rats came out.
Now,
Oh, probably rats.
Well, we used to have that white
for
rats.
example, the personality in the cells, with all the writing and artwork. This was Danny Alexander's cell. His nickname was Scrappy in here. He was 19 when he got to the prison for attempted murder. Tried to cut his friend's throat open. They were in an argument over a girl, my understanding. But he was a tattoo artist in this prison. We have one of his khakis in the museum. It's got all the pictures and drawings all over it.
Yeah, it's all right.
That was like his walking advertisement in the prison to show off his talents and abilities. loved rock and roll, country music, you know, Leonard Skinner, Hank Williams, Guns N' Roses, David Allen Coe, Led Zeppelin. Any of y'all have Hulu at home? There's a mini-series on Hulu called Castle Rock. It's produced by J.J. Abrams. It's like Stephen King-esque material. They filmed part of that here a little over 2 years ago. So if you watch Castle Rock, you'll recognize number 9. Even number 9 was featured in the trailer for Castle Rock. The actor that plays Pennywise, the It Clown, that's a guy named Bill Skarsgård. So if you watch it, you'll see him in here. So sometimes I call it Pennywise the cell, but sure enough. There is a triangular hole in the wall between 8 and 9 that we think they used the hacksaw blade to cut out for the most part. I'll just put it to you in a PC way. You know, they like to watch TV together from the wall. They go out TV.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry. Here you guys, sit back against the fence.
you're in front of number 9?
Yeah, here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that number 9?
Number 9.
Let's both get in front of number 9. Okay. Get my picture in front of number 9.
You'll also notice number 3 is a little bit different. Number 3 was modified for wheelchair access. And the last inmate that was in that cell, he was actually paroled not long before the place closed. His name was Anthony. And on his final day, he actually left his chair in that cell and he walked himself out the front door.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, moved down to Fairmont, down between Morgantown and Clarksburg. So, talk about a class act. So.
Sounds like he faked it till he made it, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
One of the biggest fakes.
They knew he really didn't need a wheelchair because every time they looked at him, you know, his legs never got small. What it was when he was in general population, the officers up in the break, they could look down at night and they could see the light from his cell casting onto the floor. Well, they could see him in his cell doing push-ups and working out, keeping his leg muscles strong. Then when the officers would come down the tier and peer in on him, you know, the inmates, you know, so then he would just sit in his chair like, you know, every time the officers would come by, he'd done that for several years, playing that up, you know. Wow. But they knew he really deep down something else was kind of fishy going on there because he had muscular legs.
It's wheelchair access.
Wheelchair in there when he took it out. Look, they cut this out so he can...
This was the day room for North Hall. North Hall officers would eat their meals in this area, and this was also a preparation area for feeding the inmates at North Hall. They would take their food cart down to the dining hall, load it up, bring it up here, put all the plasticware out, and this was just kind of like a staging area where they would stage all the meals before they actually started feeding these guys, typically 2 tiers at a time or so. Now, after their 1 hour of recreation each day, while they still had them out of their cells, they showered them 4 at a time. In the cage over there straight ahead, that was actually the gang shower, as it was known. Of course, it doesn't look like our showers at home, but it doesn't operate like our showers at home. The only plumbing in there is a 1/4-inch pipe runs across the top of the fence, shoots a real small stream of water down. And the officers were the ones that controlled the temperature and the pressure of that water. Imagination, you can only imagine. In other words, the quality of an inmate's shower was probably dependent upon his behavior. It was something that could have happened. The areas behind the fences were known as gun walks. They were manned 24/7 by an officer that had a 12-gauge and a .357 Magnum. Up on the wall up here was a crow's nest. They had an officer up there for a couple of weeks. His name was Oliver. I guess he thought he was a gunslinger or something because every day he would brag and show off to his partners down here with the pistol tricks. You know, he'd say, "Hey, look at this," you know, and they'd look up there and he'd be twirling it or doing a quick draw. Anyway, he was up there one day playing quick draw McGraw, and he said, "Hey, look at this," and they looked up there just in time when he'd done one of those quick draw numbers, and he shot himself. And this is .357 Magnum. The bullet went into his hip, more or less traveled all the way down his leg and came out the side of his ankle. He was so afraid that they were going to fire him for that incident. He had nothing to worry about. About 2 months after he shot himself, they promoted him to in charge of the armory. And I asked him, I said, whose bright idea was that to put him? You know, it's like Barney Fife off of Andy Griffith, you know, in charge of the armory. They said, well, we didn't figure he would do that again. Crazy stuff. Y'all have any questions so far? All right, well, we'll continue on into the center of the administration building. Just please watch your step over here in this doorway.
You want to let this ride?
Come right over.
Little thick brick there.
That's what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
Very front entrance or the?
Yes, sir. Sure enough, yep, absolutely. This is basically, if we were to go out that front door, we'd be staring almost directly at the Grave Creek Mound out there.
You got the key to the lock or what?
I actually do. I don't know if that makes me, whatever they said in Ghostbusters, it makes me either the
Key master.
the key master, the gatekeeper, something's going on there, yeah. But right above us was the warden's home and offices, just to give you orientation of where we're standing in the building. The immediate area here, though, we prefer to call the wheel just for this strange contraption in the middle. It's like an old-fashioned revolving door. They put it in 1894. They operated it by hand until 1899. They put a trolley car motor on it and motorized it. It had cloth belts around the spindle up top. The wheel and the north wagon gate were really the main entrances and exits in and out of the prison for just about anybody and everybody. Whether you're coming to work, visit, or live here. Now, there's only 2 of these wheels in existence. The other one is still in operation today in Manchester, England, at Strangeways Prison. And it's also an extra layer of security, keeping inmates on this side away from the front doors and the warden upstairs. So, if y'all have Netflix at home, you may have seen, or better heard, or better yet seen, a Netflix original series called Mindhunter. It's about FBI profilers. They filmed part of that here 4 or 5 years ago, and if you watch some Mindhunter, you'll see some shots of the wheel and some of the cell blocks down in Newhall that we'll see before long. So, on the right of the wheel is payroll and processing. On the left was the original non-contact visitation that they used until about 1980 when they moved into the lobby, that first room we started in with all the windows. The U.S. Post Office here at the penitentiary was over in those rooms there. Even had a couple inmates working there helping them sort the mail. Across the hall was commissary. They could buy a number of items. Stationery, hygiene items, tobacco products, coffee, tea, pop, Little Debbie cakes, candy, chips, chewing gum, noodles, Roach Motels. Their TVs they'd buy in there. In the back of the commissary, they had a barber shop. And the barber was a trustee inmate, but he was a murderer. Trusted with the scissors and the blades and all that good stuff. Well, he would cut the officers and inmates' hair. But believe it or not, even until 1995, the public was allowed to come in here. Even the little ones could come in and get their hair cut. Y'all could have came in off Jefferson Avenue, walk up to the officer at the cage, he'd check you in, he'd say, I'm here to get my hair cut. You know, you get your information, everything. They'd spin you around. You'd go over there. He would charge you a quarter or 50 cents per person to do whatever, cut your hair. And for the guys, at least, if you wanted to, he'd shave your neck with a straight razor. Like Sweeney Todd stuff. So I understand that since then he's been released on parole. He moved down to Texas. He's got a shop open today in Houston. So he's got a new start in life, I guess. Definitely watch your step over here in this door. There's just a little rise in the floor. So that gives you a really good view inside there for a picture. You can see how much different this side looks, where this was built by the construction crews and not by the inmates. The south yard here is general population yard, mainline yard. So sometimes, some days they had 400 plus guys out here with only 1 yard officer to watch them. Yard officer was unarmed, just had their radio and their wits about them, relying on the tower officers with the long rifles to really watch your back. General population inmates were still very, very dangerous individuals, of course, still murderers and people convicted of all kinds of felonies. But these guys could coexist more peacefully. They were a little more level-headed, and so in return, they had life here a little better, a little easier. As you can tell, much nicer yard, and they had better yard time. They could come out here as early as 8 a.m., stay out here until sometimes as late as 10 p.m., of course, aside from the meal times. But they would spend their days walking the track. They had a weight pad here where they did lift free weights, believe it or not. Over by the school bus in the chapel, they play handball, basketball, tetherball. They would sit down at the tables and write cards to their loved ones, play checkers, chess, poker, and arm wrestle. Down in the field, they used to play baseball and football down there. They called themselves the West Virginia Cougars. Excellent athletes. Of course, you think of all the time they had to practice. They weren't half bad. Well, they would invite a lot of the local teams in here to play these guys. And I mean like high school students and college teams would come right in here and play these maximum security inmates. So pretty crazy stuff when you think about it. Mm-hmm. The obstacle course over there, that is a recent addition. That is here for law enforcement training, and also they do some canine training over there as well. The chapel is the only structure on the south end that was built by the inmates. That was built in the late 70s. Local churches donated $20,000. Christian inmates donated the rest of the money. They all pitched in. Like I say, when they built that chapel, that was their all-faith, all-denomination chapel. For a little while, they even allowed weddings in there. Allowed well-behaved inmates to marry girlfriends, get vows renewed with wives, and the idea was just to give them some hope, give them some gumption, and want to get out of here someday. Now, the prison, believe it or not, even had its own AM radio station. They actually had that in the little white room here, where a couple inmates ran it. It was called WPEN, and they'd play music and broadcast the Cougars games and sports announcements, things like that. Just about every cell in this old prison had a little transistor radio in it, if anything. Down below there is one of the entrances into the full-size south basement. Now that's really where we have our haunted house located. That we'll be having later tonight. Anyone coming back for the haunted house? I'm going to say it. Good chance I'll be seeing you later probably. They're putting me somewhere in there doing something scaring folks, or at least trying. There's an indoor recreation room down there. Excuse me, that was used anytime the weather was really bad. Or if it was frigid out here, they'd take the guys in and get them out of the elements. And they loved it. You know, it wasn't just a change of pace and scenery for them, but they had comforts of the free world down there. They had pool tables, ping pong tables, card tables, arcade games, couches even for them to stretch out. You imagine, it's a very nice change for them in a place like this. The only problem, though, was that was a room the officers virtually never watched. Completely unsupervised down there. You can only imagine the things that the inmates would do down there without being supervised. All I'm going to say, though, is it's like Vegas. What happened there stayed there, and the inmates were the ones to name it the Sugar Shack. Oh, yeah. The rest is history. That's putting it nicely. Yes, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, I had it was really cute because a couple of years ago I had this young man on tour. I mean, he could have been 9 years old, real young. And he was sitting right here, and he was so confident. He knew why they called it that. He proudly exclaimed in front of the whole tour. He said, "I know why they called it the Sugar Shack." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because when the inmates went down there, their blood sugar got too high." His dad looked at him and said, "Don't worry about it, son." The bathrooms right there used to be more enclosed to look normal. You know the saying, one bad apple spoils the bushel. They had a long history of guys getting assaulted in there, and the final straw was a guy named Mark. He was over in the corner where the stall now is, and he was nearly murdered. Had to have facial reconstructive surgery, and like I say, nearly survived, but barely survived. But after that, the warden told the inmates that if they were going to behave like animals out here, he'd make them use the bathroom like animals. So when they tore the walls out, it just improved the visibility for everybody. Of course, you know, you think about it, going to the bathroom in front of 300 guys out here at this point would have been the least of their worries, but Still kind of an adjustment, I guess, for day one. Y'all have any questions?
I do.
Yes.
How was it determined if you got hung or executed by the chair?
So actually what it was it was just basically one or the other. From 1899 to 1949, it was all hanging. And then the warden at the time, around 1950, his name was Warden Skeen. He heard of the electric chair in those times he felt was more humane way of executing an inmate, more so than hanging. And so that's when he had Paul Glenn build the chair, and he switched to electrocution. And then it was only used on those 9 inmates from 51 to 59. But yeah, it was just one or the other. It was just hanging first, and then when they switched to the chair. Sure enough. Which is crazy because you think about it. I mean, you know, and I understand they, truth be told, I'm sure, you know, of course they did commit very, very heinous crimes to be in that position. But to call the chair itself humane, I think is a little bit of a misnomer. Because, you know, a lot of people ask us about that leather face mask that we have in the shadow box out front. And that is the mask that they used on the inmates because, you know, some people say, oh, it's just a rumor, that doesn't happen. It actually is true that, you know, with that much 1700 volts going through the body for 25 seconds, it does cause, you know, the blood gets very hot, so there'll be foaming, blood vessels bursting. I know of some worst case scenarios of some electric chair executions in the country where an inmate's eyes would actually rest on the lower eyelid, and they'd actually, just the force pressure would pop them out of the sockets. So that mask would hold all that in for those that were lucky enough to watch. So personally, I'd rather be shot. Be a lot quicker, you know, than that chair. So.
Hung with a long rope.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd even like that.
Very quick decapitation.
Well, oh no, I see what you. Yeah, okay,
Hung
yeah.
with a long rope.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they had a guy, Harry Powers. He was executed here around 1931. And his rope was too short, so he strangled to death. Took him 10 minutes. Yeah. But I think that was probably done on purpose with him specifically, because all his victims were women and children. I mean, he's a real sick guy. But they had taken pictures of him when he got here to the prison, over in the original infirmary, and he was sitting up on the examining table, and he's black eyebrows, you know, cut up. Well, they wrote at the bottom of the picture that he fell down the stairs. So I think these were the stairs he fell down. So, probably. That's just, you know, outside looking in. But
Where is the sugar?
the sugar shack is actually right down below there. Through there. Yes, sir, sure enough. Yeah, nowadays, this time of the year, it doesn't look anything like what it usually does, because we got the haunted house set up in there, and there's a big scene that's, you know, but yeah, sure enough.
It's like a cellar.
Usually at this point, I always tell folks we got our grand finale in store. Our final stop is New Wall is the general population housing. Just be aware that when we enter the housing unit and we're in there about a cell block, if you get close to the wall in there, there's going to be a drain right up against the wall. So if you get close to it, just be mindful of the drain so you don't twist your ankle.
They just hose the place out, huh?
Yeah.
I know they're draining the
Oh, I couldn't wait the best time to come and go down. Poor guy looked like he was scared to go down.
You are.
Take care, right?
Yeah.
Do they sell the old fixtures here? Like you wouldn't buy an old stink. Do they sell the fixtures?
You know what? That would be kind of a cool idea, but they don't. And honestly, the main reason behind that is just where the state still owns it technically. Yeah, I've never heard of talked about that.
Look at him.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a face. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
pretty cool. Yeah, that old porcelain like that. It's
Yeah, re-porcelain it and use it somewhere.
oh yeah, that'd be a really cool conversation piece. You know, very cool. So this is New Wall. We are on J block, and the other side is K block. Then down below is L block and N block. 320 cells. These are 5x7, but a little taller than the ones in North Hall. Some cells here were one man, some were two man. There were some years they had over 500 guys in New Wall with only 4 officers to watch them. They call it Migraine City because of how loud it would be in here. Even at 2 or 3 in the morning, you could walk in, there'd be 9 guys taking a shower. You know, every hour of the day, you're going to have a bunch of noise in here with the sound of inmates banging on the cell doors, screaming, yelling, cussing, turning their radios and TVs ungodly loud, and that was just round the clock.
Were they allowed to like paint their own cells?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. For the most part, that was done in later years when they knew they were about to close. They were trying to get rid of all their extra paint on hand. And they kind of used that as an incentive for good or better behavior with the inmates. And as long as they painted it any color but black, brown, or dark gray, they'd be okay. They just didn't want any real dark colors just for visibility at the nighttime security counts. And it's kind of cool to see, you know, how, you know, as the saying goes, to each their own, how they would settle into their new homes. Like number 4, they'd take sponges or feathers, create textures in the paint. Some of them would take stencils like here in 2, paint butterflies and dragons with stencils or stars, like in cell 3 on the second tier. Kind of neat, you know. The first 2 cells down there that we walked by are pink and purple. You may have noticed those are our Martha Stewart cells. And that was home to Sweet Lucy and Wonder Woman. And all I will say about those guys was Sweet Lucy was known to buy Skittles candies from commissary. And he would lick either side of the candy to get the dye wet. That was his makeup. Yeah. These cells were updated in the mid to late 50s with mechanical locks. They're electronically operated. Each one has an individual motor in it, so it allows you to operate one cell at a time or a full tier of cells at a time.
One cell right here.
Well, that is actually where they had like a manual override in the event of some kind of power outage. We go down and we operate this control that turns it away from electric, but it turns it to a release like a manual mode. And then this exposes like a keyhole. We have a big Allen wrench. We stick it in there and turn it. Then we can operate it by the handles. And I've had to do that a few times because I've had people that's actually went in and it's, you know, they'll close the door behind them and it'll lock on them. And of course I make them sweat it a little bit. I say, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do.
You're stuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Do they fly?
Yes, they do. Yes, they sure do. They just like kind of the more traditional style, I guess, kind of like in the TVs and movies, especially with the open bar design.
Is this like a hole because it's just a padded?
So that pad, that used to be a typical cell. Actually, it was painted white. Then 7 or 8 years ago, the state put the padding in there. They used that to train for cell extractions.
Oh, okay.
For what?
I got you.
For cell extractions. Like if an inmate doesn't want to leave his cell, they get like 5 or 6 guys together with a shield and have to go in there and persuade him to come out.
Remove them with force.
Yes, sir. Sure enough, yeah, that's yeah, a little bit of manhandling going on, I guess.
I would want to come out. I don't want to be stuck in there all day.
Yeah, you would think they wouldn't need to be told twice to come out. You know, that's a good point.
It's entertainment for him. All it is.
No, I want that.
Give him something to do.
You're going to leave all of this right now.
Now, these guys are only locked down at night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Otherwise, they'd open these doors every hour on the hour for 10 minutes only. That was called the 10-minute run. Gave them a 10-minute window of time to move elsewhere in the institution. If they wanted to go to the yard, go to industry, chow hall, laundry, commissary, law library. wherever. If they wanted to move somewhere in this prison between those hours, they had to have a little hallway pass. So, now typically at this time on tour, we like to lock folks into the cells, but like I said earlier, unfortunately, it's kind of tricky for me to do it, truth be told, the way I like to do it. So what I like to do in lieu of that so far this season is I've been still yet demonstrating the cells for everybody. So you can see them, hear them, gives you a chance to get a video of them if you like. And really, the main focal of this is that sound, because you hear this and you can imagine hearing this 100+ times a day in here, perhaps for years. So what I'm going to do here in a moment, I'm going to run up to the controls. I'm going to lock down 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. And then I'm going to lock the second tier down from cell 4 down. And then I'll begin to reopen these in sequence. So here in just a moment, we'll do a little demo.
Ooh. Okay.
Now they had a bell. It sounded similar to a school bell. They rang it twice to signal the doors are about to move. So we'll lock the first tier down here. Second tier. Folks to come back, but hopefully next time you're here, it'll be after all the madness and we can lock you in a cell, and then you can see some of the antics I like to pull, because usually every tour, I like to keep someone locked down a little longer than everyone else and make them think it broke down.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially since when we come back, we'll be the only ones knowing.
That's why I always tell folks that it's the best kind of prison to come to, because even if the door slams behind you or if you get locked in, you can pretty much still yet come and go as you please. That's what always matters at the end of the day. So, do any of y'all have any questions at this point? I do want to thank y'all for coming out today. I do hope y'all enjoy the tour. Please tell your friends and family about us. We have something for literally everybody here in prison. Variety of day tours, evening, night tours. We even have an escape room upstairs. Of course, our haunted house and all that fun stuff this time of year. And hey, don't forget we're open for weddings. So, I say, definitely encourage y'all, please check the museum out if you've yet to do so. And if anything, before you walk out today, you got to round out your trip to prison, make it official, and get a mug shot there in front of that poster in the lobby. It's not just one to the front. You also turn and get the profile to the side. And trust me, because it makes a wonderful Christmas card for your family. But stay tuned with us at wvpentours.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Google Reviews, and TripAdvisor. We do love to hear what you thought about the tour. So if you ever do decide to leave a review, like I said, we do love to hear it. So if you took any photos that you see anything weird in them, or any videos today that you see something you can't explain, send them our way too. We love to see that stuff as well. So, is it acting weird?
It died earlier and now it's back.
See, battery drain's very common in here. Yeah, we've had people, I wish I had a nickel for every time it's happened. I've seen people's phones just die from a...
It's dying pretty fast.
What's up with the huge cell?
It's probably going to be dead next.
Down there, that's where they converted 3 cells into 1 for handicap.
Oh, okay.
Each one of those cells would have been for 3 inmates in chairs. 1 through 6 on the first tier of L is actually 2 cells.
Okay.
1 through 3, 1, and then of course 4 through 6. And sure enough. So. All right. Well, we'll take the scenic route back up Main Street to the lobby, so y'all can get paroled. back and see us, but next time bring more folks with you, because you see for yourself, we got all the vacancy you need.
Thank you.
Thank you all, it's my pleasure. Come on back, we'll do it again someday. Tell you more, take a stick or let her go there.
Mug shot taken.
It'll be interesting.